Alright, so today I want to showcase a ball python morph that you may not be that familiar with, and that is the Cypress ball python. And if you haven't seen the Cypress, I'd say it's a pretty subtle gene by itself, and it mixes pretty well with quite a few genes. As a matter of fact, when Cypress first came out, I was pretty much new in ball pythons about 5 years ago, and I was kind of eyeing the Cypress, but the price was thousands of dollars just to get into the project. Now I was actually looked over on Morph Market, and you can actually pick up a Cypress for between $400 and $500 and get into the project. So I'd say it's within reach of the typical breeder trying to invest in a new morph. And really, for something new coming to the market, I really want to have the morph convince me that I want to buy into the project. I want to see how well it works with a lot of different genes and see if it's something I want to invest in. And I would say some genes, if you look at pretty much how they work with other genes, some genes just kind of muddy the water and they don't work very well. And sometimes those genes aren't very popular. And then sometimes you get some genes that work well with just about anything and they're pretty much a hit across the board. And I'd say Cypress is pretty much on par with a lot of your mainstream genes. It works well with quite a few different other ball python morphs in some of the combos. So in this video, I want to show you the potential of the Cypress ball python. Alright, so I am over here on the world of ball pythons, and this is what a Cypress looks like, just the straight base gene of the Cypress. And at first glance, if you look at this, it looks pretty much like a normal, very close to a normal. I'd say sometimes they have this stripe along the back, and sometimes they have more highlighting around the alien heads, which I've noticed kind of is a characteristic of the morph. A lot of times they'll have a little bit of fading right at the back of the head. I've also noticed that. So for this video, what I want to do is I want to show you first some of the combos without the Cypress, and then we're going to add Cypress to the mix so you can really see the effect of what Cypress does to some of these single genes and some of these multi-gene combos, which will be pretty interesting. So I actually came over here, the big morph list on the world of ball pythons. And the funny thing is I've been playing around with this morph list for a while. You type in Cypress and it shows you all the different combos for Cypress. Sometimes it'll have a little tab on the bottom where you can expand it even more. I would say there's quite a bit of work that has been done with the Cypress, but there's still quite a bit of work that can be done as far as adding it to some other combos. And the funny thing is I was actually playing around with this, trying to find some of the combos without the Cypress in. And for example, if you put like pastel pinstripe, you get different results versus if you mix it up and put in pinstripe pastel. So when you're looking through the big morph list here on the world of ball pythons, it seems like the order of the genes really matters when you're searching for some of these combos. That's just a hint there if you're looking for some combos on the big morph list, which is interesting. So over here, this is the red star. This is actually red stripe and yellow belly. And the interesting thing is it seems like Cypress really works well with both the red stripe and the yellow belly. So if you have those projects that you're working on in your breeding program, take a look at what Cypress can do for you. This is pretty impressive. It really enhances, makes it almost like it's almost like a marble, almost like a stone look. It gives it really interesting highlights. It's a really interesting snake, the Cypress red stripe yellow belly. It's kind of interesting. And over here, this is the Enchi yellow belly. It seems like it works really well with just the yellow belly. You add a little Enchi and makes it a little more impressive. Essentially, the Enchi just reduces the pattern a little bit. It's a pattern reducing gene. And then you add Cypress to that mix and take a look at what happens. It definitely enhances it and improves it. You can definitely see there's an enhancement with the Cypress. I'd say it's more like fire adds to a lot of genes. Fire is kind of the same way where it almost looks close to a normal by itself. It's a little bit different, but it's not that impressive until you start adding it with other genes, and then it really pops. So So over here, there's actually a super cypress. So cypress is actually co-dominant. So if you took a cypress and you bred it to any snake, 50% of the babies would carry the cypress gene. And you actually breed cypress to cypress, 25% of the babies are actually going to come out as a super cypress. And the cool thing about this is you can actually add to the super cypress, and it seems like yellow belly adds really well to the super cypress. Pretty much across the board, anything with yellow belly on top of cypress really makes a pop. This is a really impressive snake. It's something I've never really seen. It almost looks like a genetic stripe, which is recessive, but keep in mind this is actually a the super cypress with the yellow belly on top of it. And yellow belly is usually, I'd say yellow belly is kind of an enhancing gene as well. It's you almost can't tell the difference between a normal and a yellow belly, just the yellow belly alone. But then yellow belly, once you add it to other genes, it really starts making some incredible combos. Mixes really well with cypress. So here is another gene on top of the yellow belly. This is the spot nose yellow belly, and if you add cypress on top of that, take a look at this. It's a pretty dramatic effect. If we go back, you can see it doesn't really have the line on the spot nose yellow belly, and it like makes this really interesting line right down the back. It's really a stark contrast between the yellow line and the black around that line. It's pretty interesting how the cypress really enhances that one. Here's another one, the cinnamon pinstripe. It seems like it works really well with this to enhance the dark genes. You know, cinnamon's a really dark morph. It's a dominant morph. And you mix it with the cypress. And if you're into the dark morphs, working with cinnamon pinstripe, this almost looks like an Australian Woma python. It's kind of neat how it just brings out the gold sheen to the snake. It's pretty impressive. So another thing the cypress seems to really work well with is Mojave, and you put the chocolate on top of Mojave. And chocolate's kind of like the cinnamon, it's a dark morph. You add it to the Mojave and you get a really dark Mojave. You pop cypress on top of that and take a look at this. I think this is a really impressive combo. This is where cypress is really starting to shine. If you're working with Mojave, I would definitely consider getting into cypress. It works really well with it. Here's another one, fire. Seems like cypress works really well with fire too. I actually hatched out a couple of fires this year, so this kind of caught my attention when I saw the fire cypress. This is just a straight fire. You add cypress on top of that, and take a look at that. It completely changes the snake and makes it really bright and enhances the sharpness, and I would say kind of the contrast of the snakes. It makes it brighter and more contrasty, I guess you'd say, as far as mixing it with other morphs. Here's a Mojave. It works well with Mojaves. Just a straight Mojave, you put cypress on top of that, and take a look at that. That is a really dramatic difference. If we go back to just the Mojave and then look at the cypress, really brings out the yellow. Seems like it really lightens the sides on a lot of these, kind of reduces the pattern on the sides, makes it a lot whiter, and then brings all the pattern up to the back. And a lot of times it brings like a jagged stripe down the back, which is kind of interesting how it works with these morphs. So take a look. This is a pretty impressive combination. So this is just a straight champagne, and the champagne is usually so overwhelming when you mix it with other morphs. Usually you don't see a really huge effect unless you mix it with the right genes. I would say champagne's kind of a tough sell. It's kind of tough to work with, but you mix it with cypress and take a look at what this is really interesting. It almost looks like a highway or a freeway with the asphalt and the yellow belly. It'd be interesting to actually see what the genetics are on the champagne cypress, if it's allelic or not. So this is an Enchi Fire Mojave. So now we're starting to stack genes that work really well with the cypress, both the Mojave and the fire. And of course, Enchi works well with anything. It's just a pattern reducer. You throw in some cypress and take a look at this. Fire, Enchi, Mojave, cypress. This snake is out of this world. I can't even believe what the difference is. Let's go back to the other one, because it doesn't even look like the same snake. You start adding the really, It'd be interesting to add like the Mojave, the Fire, the Yellow Belly, and the Champagne, and then throw the Cypress into the mix to see what all those genes that work really well with the Cypress when you start stacking them like that, and then you throw Cypress on top, how impressive that really looks. That is one of the most amazing snakes that I've seen. So here, that actually works really well with the Mojave, but it also works well with the lesser. Both are in the blue-eyed leucistic. This is a lesser pastel. You throw in Cypress, and this is a really interesting combo too. You can tell on most of these, it's kind of whitening out the sides, bringing all the pattern to the top. A lot of times it'll form the solid line or jagged, kind of almost a little bit broken line on the top, and it's usually not a straight line. It's a little bit broken up, which is kind of interesting. So I thought I'd throw in some of the potential combos with the Cypress. Some of these are incredible. I was just going through kind of the most expensive Cypress combos, and a lot of these you really can't look at just the base morphs. You can just kind of look at really what's going on. And now that I've kind of had a handle on the Cypress, you can look at some of these combos and say, all right, there's a lot of pattern that's being reduced up to the top. The sides are a little bit lightened out. You get this kind of a jagged pattern, a little bit broken up, and you can tell, hey, is there Cypress in there? It's kind of interesting how you start looking at the different combinations, and then pretty soon you're looking at other combos and you can pick out the individual genes by the appearance of the snake. This happens to be the Orange Dreams Cypress Banana Black Pastel, which is really interesting. Here's another one. This is the Cypress Inchy Freeway. This is pretty much the same thing as the Cypress Mardi Gras, and I'd say this would be a little bit harder to tell there's actually Cypress in there because the highways and freeways pretty much have this dotted line, like it's pretty much like down the middle of the road. I think that's why they call it the highways and the freeways, because it has the dotted yellow line going down the middle of the road. And it's an interesting combo. This is actually a Cypress Mardi Gras, which is the Inchy asphalt yellow belly. And take a look at this. I thought this was pretty interesting. This is the Banana Cypress Red Stripe. So Cypress works really well with red stripe, and then you add banana on top of that, and you get this really interesting looking snake. I've never seen one quite like this. I'd say it's a pretty unusual snake. So this is really interesting as well. So you know what a bumblebee looks like? It's a pastel spider, and then you add Cypress on top of this. It is pretty amazing that the Cypress does this to a bumblebee, and this is kind of interesting. This one actually sold for $2,500, but it's 3 years old, and then 3 years ago, actually, getting into the Cypress was a lot more expensive than it is today. So I was actually sorting kind of by the most expensive Cypress that you can find, and these are kind of interesting. A lot of these are pretty high-end. Some of this is like a Cypress Clown. I was going through some of this trying to pick out what it really mixes with, and if you look up at the top here, there's actually 350 Cypress and Cypress combos. So there's a lot of stuff on Morph Market here if you actually want to go through and look at all the different Cypress combos. It's a pretty interesting gene, and it mixes pretty well with a lot of the other genes. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And Michael Skaggs asks, I have a super pastel. What can I breed that to make some crazy combos? And that is a very good question. I'd say it's probably one of the most popular questions that I've been asked. What can I breed my snake to? And I'd say probably the best place to start would be to go over to Morph Market, plug in just pastel, and then sort from the lowest price to the highest price and see which snakes really impress you and what combos have been made with the pastel. And pretty much you can just keep scrolling through until you hit your budget, and that's pretty much it as far as what you can actually afford to invest in to actually breed back to your super pastel. And keep in mind, super pastel, everything in the whole clutch, all the babies will be pastel, which is pretty awesome. So probably, if you ask me what works really well with pastel, if you want a really bright and contrasty snake, I don't know what Bobby's doing here. Where are you going? She's ready to fall off my shoulders. I would say probably the genes that work really well with pastel is if you layered on like Fire and Orange Dream and Yellow Belly. If you mix those three with pastel, you would get some really impressive snakes. And if you want to really jumble up the pattern on top of that, I would add something like GHI to make a really bright, crazy looking, really high contrasty snake. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.